It's brilliant to welcome Michaela here. As I said to the master students a couple of weeks ago, LinkedIn is a really good way of sharing information, and because of LinkedIn, it's only just now that I've discovered all the cool stuff that Michaela's done. So Michaela did her undergrad at University of East Anglia, her master's at the University of Copenhagen and Agri-Paris Tech, and she's also done some really important and interesting work around the world. As a research assistant in Cameroon, she also did an internship for the FAO, and she's been a research consultant at C4, the Centre for International Forestry Research, for many years as well. But today she's going to mostly be talking about her PhD work. Yeah. So she's right in the final stretches of her PhD, and one of the lovely things about the Dice Talks format is that we get to hear about the brilliant work that our PhD students are doing. So it's fantastic to be able to welcome her today. So let's start with the welcome.
Thank you. And then just next.
Yes.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Bob. So I'm basically going to be presenting my PhD work. I'm currently in the last year. So here's the title, Human Wellbeing and Forests in a Changing Landscape in Indonesia. So before I get into the actual PhD work, I thought it would be good just to Bob basically already gave a background of myself, but just giving an introduction of who I am. But to be honest, when I'm usually posed with this question, they're like, "Oh, what's your academic background?" And very much when people are like, "Where you really come from?" I get this sort of identity crisis. I'm like, "Oh, I don't really know. Am I an ecologist? Am I in conservation? Am I an economist? These sort of things. Or am I environmental science?" So rather than tell you basically what my background is, perhaps by discipline, I thought I will share with you kind of the research that I've been part of in the past. So this is a word cloud, which kind of forms, basically the titles of journal articles or research that I've been part of. So here you can see that a lot of my work has been around food and forests, which has been predominantly in the tropics. And you can also see things like I deal a lot with kind of forestry and aquatic systems. But most of this work has, as you see, has been in Indonesia. So one of the kind of things that pops out when I see this word cloud, for example, is that I've been working in several disciplines. So much of my work has been interdisciplinary from my bachelor's up until now. I've always been working within different, or between different disciplines as well. And I think that's really much what is captured in my PhD, that much of the work that I do is very interdisciplinary. So there are two parts to my PhD that I will share with you. So the first one is I'll be sharing about some work we've been doing on measuring the impacts of nickel mining in Sulawesi, Indonesia. And so this is very much at the regional scale. So looking at data between villages. I'll get into the kind of more detail into the methods, but it's predominantly quantitative. It's an impact evaluation approach. And uses geospatial analysis. And so one of the benefits of kind of looking at these regional scales is that you're able to identify patterns and processes that work at these broader scales. A lot of this research speaks and supports to perhaps more global and national policy decision-making and goals. And also kind of regional research at this level is able to identify perhaps gaps or areas where more localized data is needed. And so for the second part, I'm trying, the second part of the PhD is looking to understand the lived experiences of fishers in mangrove communities in West Kalimantan. And so this scale is much more localized. So I'm looking at specifically just one village, but looking at the dynamics within that village. It's predominantly qualitative. It uses participatory methods and uses something called geothematic analysis. Focusing on this level, you're able to explain and contextualize more the effects in complex landscapes. It also gives more space to do participatory research, which I'll explain more about later. And you're able to account for these values, meanings, and experiences that cannot be measured by proxies or cannot be observed through spatial data. So this research is in Indonesia. I've been in Indonesia since 2017 when I started my work at C4 as an intern. And I've I've lived there and I've been working there since. And so I thought, rather than show you a map of Indonesia, perhaps people know where it is in Southeast Asia, you know, I asked my friends, what's an interesting fact that I can share with people about Indonesia? And my friends were like, what about that tweet that went viral, a couple months ago? I was like, that's a good idea, because it has food and it has a map. So this is the tweet that I posted a couple of months ago. And it was my first viral tweet, and perhaps the last viral tweet I'll ever have. But I came across this paper, perhaps online, and it was basically what they did in this study was, assess the varieties of sambal. So if people don't know, sambal is a chili paste in Indonesia, and it was just basically mapping the diversity across the country. So this is a paper carried out by Surya and Teja Kusuma. And I think this tweet, the fact that it went viral as well, kind of says two things. First, that Indonesia has a strong identity for sambal and tied to certain identities of sambal. But I think as well, Indonesia is a country of diversity. I think that was the main message that came across. So they found that there were over like 100 different types of sambals in the country. And it's not only just sambal. Areth has also pointed out to me that in Indonesia you also have a variety of bananas. I mean, so in the UK, you could probably only just find one. And I'll be impressed if you actually know like the name of the variety that's here. It's Cavendish, by the way, but yeah. But in Indonesia, you have, so these are wild bananas, but they have over 300 varieties. And all amazing, taste great, definitely worth a try. Okay. But again, I think this reflects as well the diversity within Indonesia. So you have, if I got my numbers correct, over 700 languages. So it's very linguistically diverse, but also you have over 1,000 different ethnic groups. And I think it really kind of shows this relationship, especially with the sample paper, like this diversity within food and culture. So moving on to the first part of the study, looking at the implications of nickel mining on forest and local communities in Sulawesi. So before I start, this was definitely not a one-person show, even though I say my PhD is definitely a collaboration. So my supervisors, Matt and Zoe, but this was also a collaboration with people at University of Indonesia. So Mbak Nurul, Yatnam, Pak Sonny, and also Courtney and Maria, who were here before as postdocs, who contributed greatly to the paper, and also Truly as well. He's now at the Natural Resource Institute. So why, you might say, do we want to look at the impacts of nickel? Oh, sorry. So nickel is a critical mineral, or was recently classed as a critical mineral because it is it's a critical element for supporting societies, and especially towards renewable energies. So this critical element, as we know, for renewable energies, there's a lot of push to increase its uptake because of its contribution to meeting one of the goals, which is the climate action. But there are some concerns about the sustainability in terms of its production and supply, and also what implications that might have more localized in terms of well-being and also its environmental impacts. So this is a picture of nickel and its element. So currently we're producing globally around 2.7 million, but that's expected to double by 2040. And most of this currently is for stainless steel. So this is just basically is all around you, but mostly for stainless steel, 77%. And that's expected to, for renewable energy, so that's at the bottom. Currently, nickel contributes around 9% of that demand, but that's expected to increase to 61%. And this is also because there's a great, as I mentioned, great push towards the uptake of renewable energies and low carbon technology. So, Indonesia is officially the #1 producer of nickel. They produce around a third of global nickel in the world. And most of that is concentrated in Sulawesi, which is in the center of Indonesia. So here you can see at the bottom around 2/3 is produced in this region. But yes, there's also other minerals as well, so copper, rock, iron, gold. And so particularly after the introduction of no longer new, but the mining law that was introduced, there was a rapid issuance, let's say, of mining permits. So here we can see there's a map for 2011, the areas in nickel, so nickel's in orange, and then other, you can see the kind of the mining concessions that are in production in Sulawesi. So this is just to give you an idea of what a mine looks like in Sulawesi. So this is in Malawi, Sulawesi Tenggara in Indonesia. This, for nickel mining, particularly in Indonesia, it's laterite. So in order to get to the nickel, you have to clear the top layer of land because it's within that top layer of the soil. So this is very different to, say, like other types of mining where you typically, dig underground. So this is really like you have to clear the top layer of the land. Yes. And so we wanted to know what are the impacts of nickel mining. So there's actually very little research in addressing specifically what impact nickel mining has. But in the wider literature, when we focus on mining in general, in terms of forest cover, so we get a mixed picture. So here, there's one paper that found industrial mining is a significant driver of tropical deforestation. And then there are other studies which have shown that, for example, in copper mining, there was no evidence of increased deforestation in Zambia. And so this could be because, potentially because of the different mining commodities, and therefore has a different sort of pattern in deforestation. But also it depends whether that mining concession was already in an area where there was forest, for example. And so what sort of impacts does it have on local communities and well-being? So the top one says, gold mining increased household expenditure in Burkina Faso, and then here it also says that mining was related to poorer nutritional diversity in sub-Saharan Africa. So here we can see there's also a kind of diverging picture, and this could be because of the different indicators that I use to measure sort of well-being. And so these were our research questions. So first we wanted to look at what was the impacts of nickel mining on forests specifically. And so we used spatial forest data and statistical matching methods. Then we wanted to understand how nickel mining might also impact village well-being. So for that we used census data. And then we also wanted to compare what impacts nickel mining had in comparison to other sorts of mineral commodities. So quickly, this is the kind of layer we used. It's a global forest change. This is a forest area that a lot of people use in research to monitor kind of forest cover change. And so we we basically measured forest loss between 2011 and 2018 using this layer. And we measure well-being. So well-being, there are many different sorts of concepts and frameworks on what well-being is. I think the key part is that well-being is a multidimensional concept. So borrowing from the Sustainable Development Goals, in their definition, poverty is more than just a lack of income and resources. It includes hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education, social discrimination and exclusion, as well as lack of participation in decision-making. So well-being comes from a capability of functioning in society. So it's not just, for example, income or specific resources, but it's what you can also do with them. And poverty we consider as the lack of capabilities, so the inverse. So Courtney and Matt had the laborious job of developing the Wellbeing Index, as well as others. So Courtney and Matt and others developed a index which spanned across 6 dimensions. So this is education, health, living standards, infrastructure and services, environment, and social cohesion. So the decision and the indicators, or the choice, was based on 2 things. So first was the kind of national sort of targets that Indonesia had, and that were also in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also it was a matter of what was available in data. And so the data that we used, as I said, was from a census called PODES. So it's a village-level census survey across all villages in Indonesia that's taken every 3 to 4 years. So in Sulawesi, that's like around 11,000. And we had 3 time points, so 2011, 2014, and 2018. And this map, I think, nicely shows the sort of, how to describe it, shows you basically well-being spatially. So in blue, it means that there's higher levels of well-being, and then in red, it's lower. So yeah. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of what's happening, what is happening in Sulawesi between 2011 and 2018. So overall, villages experienced a small decline in forest cover, so 36 to 34%. Well-being slightly improved, mostly in terms of living standards and health, but there were small declines in education, social and environmental well-being. So we used an impact evaluation approach, so a spatial matching approach. So this counterfactual analysis basically wants to look at what would have happened in a village had there not been a mine, compared to what has happened when there is a mine. So in order to do this, we began with all villages, so all 7,700. We then looked at where we then separated them into two groups. So we included villages where no mining had occurred between 2000 and 2011. And then for non-mining villages, these were also villages where no mining occurred over that period as well, so between 2000 and 2018. Whereas in mining villages, we considered those as villages that overlapped with mining concessions that were established between 2011 and 2018. So once we kind of split them into those two groups, we then looked at the characteristics, those baseline characteristics of each of those villages. And then we aimed to match one of those villages within the non-mining group with a village within the mining group that shared those similar baseline characteristics. So once it's matched, you then create a new sample, which is now your new match sample. And then after that, you look at how your outcomes, so for us it was forest cover and well-being, how that changed between 2011 and 2018 in both these groups. So once in non-mining villages, what was the change in well-being and forest cover over that 7-year period, and similarly within that in the mining area. After that, once you account for that change before and after, you then compare that difference between the two groups. And that is an impact evaluation approach. Okay, so data layers. The mining concession layer came from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. It was a rich data set. It basically showed you where those mining concessions are, the commodities, and when they were established. We also included baseline conditions that were controlled for in the model. And then our outcomes of interest. So that was forest cover, and we measured them to match the PODES data with those 3 time points, 2011, 2014, 2018. And then, our well-being data that derived from PODES. Okay, so on to interesting stuff. So this are the results. So on average, between 2011 and 2018. So first to note, nickel is in orange and other mines is in purple. So we can see over 1 to 7 years that if it's on this side, so when it goes into the negative on the right, it means that there's a decline in forest cover, or there's an increase on the other side. And same with well-being. If it goes into the negative, it means that there was a decrease in well-being, and then positive. So yeah, we can see that nickel mining experienced a decline in forest cover, both in other and nickel. Whereas for overall well-being, we see that there was more of a decline in well-being in nickel mining villages. Okay. Then after that, because it was over a 1 to 7 year period, we wanted to break it down and see whether those impacts were immediate or whether they were in the medium term. So we looked at those impacts from a 1 to 3 year period and then a 4 to 7 year period. So on the bottom you can see that's basically time going on, and we can see that in both nickel and in other, deforestation occurred, but the onset of deforestation was faster within the first 1 to 3 years. Whereas when we look at well-being, we see that there's a constant decline for nickel mining in the orange. Okay. So then after that, as you saw, we kind of broke it down by dimension. So now we we had well-being, and it was consisted of 6 dimensions. So then we broke it down, and we wanted to see how those impacts varied between those dimensions. And so what's really key here is that we can see that in environmental well-being, so just to remind you, was like, for example, air pollution, water pollution, and natural disasters, we see that there's actually a decline. So there was greater deterioration of environmental indicators for nickel mining, where we saw slight improvements in living standards after 4 to 7 years. Right. So then after that, we wanted to look at, specifically for nickel mining, were there differences based on the poverty baseline conditions of each village. So villages in 2011 that we have here, so they're considered low, so they had low levels of poverty, or it was considered to be relatively high in 2011. And again, this is just for nickel mining. And so when we do this, we see that, for example, with forest cover, it's relatively the same in terms of rate, but more of a decline, 4 to 7 years on. And again, there were lower reductions of well-being, but it was also quite similar to prosperous villages. Again, we did the same thing, and we wanted to break it down by dimension. So here we can see that, for example, for environmental well-being and in health, we see that there is a greater decline in well-being, whereas we see slight improvements, for example, in infrastructure. So we can definitely see that there are differences across these dimensions. Some shortcomings of the analysis. While we were able to identify the different types of mining commodities, we weren't able, for example, to include information about the intensity of production, nor the type of production. So, for example, if it was small scale or artisanal, or whether it was open cast. But hopefully using the mineral commodity as a proxy, as a way, if we knew, or if there's information on how that's usually processed, then that could be used as a proxy. Deforestation was measured at the village level, so we weren't able to, so we didn't measure deforestation within the mining concession, but it also included deforestation that occurred outside of the mining area. Also, this is limited to a village level analysis, so we weren't able to assess the outcomes between people and households within a village, and who may experience those impacts quite differently. And we were limited in the dimensions of well-being, in the sense that we weren't, as well as the well-being indicator, we're not able to kind of capture the kind of more subjective and relational aspects of well-being, and the ability to adapt to changes. Yeah, so these are the key findings. So nickel mining, as well as other mining, increased deforestation, but well-being declined overall. But this varied by dimension. So we can see that well-being worsened compared to living standards, for example. Impacts between nickel mining and other types of mineral commodities also varied. While they were the same for deforestation, we saw that there was a greater decline in environmental indicators for villages around mines. And last, there were varying impacts by poverty status as well. So, for example, villages where there were already high levels of poverty experienced worse outcomes in terms of environmental and health dimensions, but then there were slight improvements in living standards and infrastructure. So, that was the first part. I don't know if how am I doing for time? I don't know. I don't know if people want to do questions now on that part, or whether should we just continue? Okay, right. Okay, words from Bob. How much time do I have left? Sorry.
So it's 1:30 now.
1:30, so I got 20, yeah. So this is the second part of the PhD, which is visualizing the mangrove foodscape, understanding the lived experience of landscape changes in West Borneo in Indonesia. So again, I'm not a one-man show. This is the team, the fieldwork team. So very much, Uti was like Romanti was the kind of local counterpart researcher in Indonesia. Also Lenny and Putri, who were also in the field and were very instrumental in doing the research, in doing the fieldwork, but also in the transcriptions as well. Matt and Zoe, supervisors, and also Tita and Putri as well. So now I'm taking you to another region of Indonesia. So this is Kalimantan, and this is map, Indonesian Borneo, and this research is more focused in the west part of Indonesia. So why do we want to look at mangrove fishes in Indonesia? So Indonesia has the largest area of mangrove forests in the world, but it's also experiencing the greatest loss. So because there's a lot of interest in mangroves at the moment, particularly in terms of biodiversity and carbon, it has been identified as an area where it needs to be conserved and restored. Within these sort of landscapes as well, you also find many small-scale fishes, and in Indonesia, small-scale fisheries sector employs over 2.6 million people. It's considered a key actor in supporting the local economy and also in contributing to food security and nutrition. And so considering that these mangrove fishes are key actors both in terms of conservation and share this space, but also in terms of the local economy and in terms of food security, it's therefore important to really understand what sort of experiences they are also experiencing in these regions that are undergoing rapid social ecological change. So with this, I was going to explain to you about participatory photography, but I think it would be better to actually do it. So I have a small exercise, if that's okay. So just basically, whoever you're next to, just pair up, or as a trio, and look through your photo album if you have, and choose a photo that you would like to share, essentially. Very quickly. With your neighbour. Of course, this is, you're very welcome not to take part. This is free fire informed consent. Okay. Oh no, maybe Bob. Would you like to pair with Bob? Pair. But also, it doesn't have to be. If you don't have a photo, then you can just come with a story, perhaps, or a memory. Yeah. Okay. Has everyone kind of decided? Yeah, roughly. Okay. So with your partner, I basically want to you basically answer these 3 questions. So, what is happening in this photo? Why did you take this photo? And why have you chosen to share it? Essentially. Do you have anything? Okay. Okay, guys, let's wrap it up. I won't get anyone, no one needs to really share their stories. But this is basically the method of participatory photography, where you come and you take a photo and you basically tell a story with that photo. But out of interest, did anyone's photo, just put your hands up, did anyone's photo include an animal or evidence of? Next one, did anyone include plants or flora, fauna of some sort? Yeah, okay. Perhaps a natural landscape? No? Okay, there's some, okay. So the idea of participatory photography is also to share what you think is important and what you value. So I think the reason why I ask these questions is that I'm in a group of conservation ecologists primarily here. And so you would think these things like animals, plants, and ecology are important to you. So the reason why we use participatory photography is it's a great way to break down communication barriers. So this is not only linguistically between different languages, but also between perhaps even different disciplines, and in this case between researchers and participants. And it's really a good way to a way to kind of express and communicate complex ideas around values, meaning, and experiences. So it also encourages other ways of knowing, so using visual methods and arts as a way to elicit different types of knowledge. So rather scientific knowledge, which is very much based on perhaps models and numbers, visuals and arts can help elicit more context-based or experiential or experience-based sort of knowledge and perspectives. And last, participatory research in general aims to promote more equity within research. So the idea is that participants are able to generate the data themselves. They take ownership of that research process, which they're very much part of, and they get to decide what they want to show to researchers. Okay, so in this, I describe it as the foodscape. So we use foodscape as a method of inquiry. And so here we say, and these bullet points are from Heide and Odenhoven. So food is used as a tool to connect across knowledge systems and values. So this kind of also links quite nicely to the start of my presentation. But here it is. Food is intimate and unimposing. Food provides common vocabulary, and food is simple. So the idea is that everyone eats food, everyone is part of food, and also it's part of your daily lives. And so it's a great way to kind of communicate these things, but also get past the jargon that we sometimes come with as researchers, especially in conservation and development. But that food is also very much part of place and of and broader aspects. So hence why we thought of applying a foodscapes framing. So this is the idea that food is closely knit with cultural food practices, so values, meaning, representations, but also the material world. So the physical landscape, the ecologies, but also political economy. So just to give you a rundown of the methods. So we held a training. So before that, we did a snowballing method to identify 12 women and 15 men mangrove fishers in the village. We held a training with them for half a day. We gave them phones and described what the research was going to be like. And so then they took those phones and they were able to take pictures across a period of 3 days. And with this, we gave them this prompt. So we asked them, can you take a picture of the food practices and places that are important to you and your family? So this is just one example of one of the photos that they took. And we also asked them to record their GPS points in the phone. So after that, we downloaded all the photos from the phone. We printed them and then we cut them up, and then we also mapped out the locations of each of those photographs on a map. And then we went to each of the participants' houses and we held a semi-structured interviews with them. So this is an example of one of the maps and the photos and the interview process. And through that, we also asked them to choose 3 photographs that mostly represented their life or that they felt were important to them. And then do that similar process of what I did with you guys. So then in the focus group, we then held focus group discussions. So we asked each of the participants to bring those 3 photos to that group, and together they would share those photos, those stories, and then together they would form a collage and discuss around these photographs. So this is just an example of what they did. So they brought their 3 photographs and they were asked to kind of like find similarities and differences between these photographs, what was shared, what was different, and then talk about how they're kind of interlinked with each other. So each of these scenes were given names and more of kind of like a description of each of those groups. So we also used a geothematic analysis. So this is just one method that's kind of under the umbrella of methods that integrate qualitative material and geospatial tools. The thematic or the geothematic analysis is a way in which you identify patterns in meaning, so through coding of text. So in this case, it was the transcriptions from the interviews, and then aggregate those codes to form themes. But this, a key part of it is that it's a very reflexive process, so it's also about examining the researcher's role in that research process as well, when generating those codes and themes. And the geo part of it was the mapping of the photographs. So here you can see an example of a map of one of the participants, and these were all the photographs that they took. The purpose of producing these maps is being able to present these to the participants as well, and they're able to map their mobilities and also reflect on the journeys on how they took these photographs and the different places that they went to. Okay. So this is still work in progress. So I haven't, I'm still kind of getting there in terms of the results. So rather than kind of share that with you, I thought instead it might be nice to just share a vignette of one of the things that, of the experiences of doing one of these focus group discussions, where participants were sharing values and experiences. So I won't go because I'm really low in time, but there were several themes that were identified. This is specifically for the women's group. So these were the things that they felt were important to them. And then on the right is just an example of how they started grouping together. So for me, when I saw this, there was a lot of conversation. So you see number 1 over here, when they go out to sea. This is very much describing a friendship between these two women about how they would always call on each other to go out into sea. And this was I think, it's quite a big thing because it's actually predominantly a male activity, going out to sea. But they would say that they would encourage each other and they really enjoyed it. And moving on to perhaps number 2 is this is just the harvest that people get from fishing. And here it really shows that there is when we say fishing, it's incredibly diverse. It's not just fish, it is also different types of fish. It also includes seafood, also includes prawns, but it also includes that there are different ways of doing fishing. You have different tools and also requires different practices. So within itself is quite diverse. Right, I think so I'm just going to leave with some final thoughts just to kind of wrap up in terms of when I was talking about interdisciplinarity. I think conservation is great in the terms that, I think, just borrowing this quote, that conservation is evolving. It's no longer just purely ecological or biological discipline. And I think it's great when we can when we think about working with other disciplines in terms of collating different sorts of knowledge and methods to reach shared research goals and achieve real synthesis of approaches. And this is something that I've been doing since the start of my academic career. But I think through this PhD process, there's another layer of interdisciplinarity. And that is, I think the process also involves examining the sort of boundaries and foundations and also assumptions that disciplines bring with them when they also develop their methods as well. And it's important to kind of reflect on how this affects the process of integrating knowledge across disciplines. And last part is, I think, generally we need diverse collaborations. It's not always easy to do collaborations as well. I think not to over-romanticize about interdisciplinarity. But if you want to make change. I think, that's it. These are references.